My fiancée said, "I'm not ready for a commitment." I replied, "I understand." Then I sold the engagement ring and used my share of the wedding fund to start a company with my best friend. 2 years later, she was frantically texting, "I've made a mistake," after seeing my success. I, 29M, stared at the woman I'd planned to spend my life with as she delivered the words that shattered everything. We were sitting in our favorite coffee shop, the same place where I'd nervously asked her to be my girlfriend 3 years earlier. The irony wasn't lost on me. She told me she wasn't ready for commitment. That marriage felt too permanent, too suffocating. She needed space to find herself, to explore who she was without being tied down. I watched her fidget with the engagement ring I'd saved 8 months to buy, sliding it off her finger with what seemed like relief rather than regret. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my voice steady when I told her I understood. What else could I say? That I'd already put a deposit on the venue? That I'd been secretly looking at houses with white picket fences? That I'd imagined our kids running around in the backyard of a home we'd never share? She seemed almost surprised by my calm reaction. Maybe she'd expected tears, begging, or dramatic declarations. Instead, I simply nodded and asked if she wanted me to move out of our shared apartment right away or if she needed time to figure out her living situation. She said she'd already talked to her sister about staying there for a while. The words hit me like a physical blow. She'd already made plans. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision born from pre-wedding jitters. She'd been thinking about this, planning her exit while I'd been planning our future. I went home that evening to an apartment that suddenly felt foreign. Every shared item seemed to mock me. The couch we'd picked out together, the kitchen utensils she'd insisted we needed, the photos of us smiling like we had forever ahead of us. I methodically began separating our belongings, creating 2 piles that represented the death of everything I believed in. 3 days later, I walked into the jewelry store where I'd bought the engagement ring. The jeweler remembered me, asked how the proposal had gone with obvious enthusiasm. I told him there'd been a change of plans and I needed to return the ring. His face fell with genuine sympathy as he examined the pristine condition of the ring that had barely spent 2 months on her finger. The return policy was fair. I got back about 70% of what I'd paid. Still, walking out with that check felt like closing a chapter I'd never wanted to end. But as I sat in my car afterward, staring at the amount written in neat handwriting, something shifted in my mind. My best friend had been pitching me his business idea for months. He wanted to start a digital marketing consultancy specializing in small businesses, something he'd been passionate about since college. I'd always been supportive but cautious, too focused on saving for my wedding and future family to take financial risks. But now I had nothing to lose. I called him that same afternoon and asked if his offer was still on the table. The excitement in his voice was infectious as he told me he'd been waiting for this moment, that he knew we could build something incredible together. The wedding fund sat in our shared savings account, $35,000 we'd both contributed to over 18 months. She'd put in slightly less due to her lower salary, but we'd agreed early on that marriage was a team effort. When I went to the bank to separate our accounts, I calculated exactly what belonged to me and transferred it out, leaving her portion untouched. Combined with the money from the ring, I had enough to become an equal partner in my friend's venture. We spent the next 2 weeks creating business plans, researching our target market, and setting up the legal framework for our company. The work consumed my days and exhausted me enough that I could actually sleep at night. She texted me a few times during those first weeks, asking how I was doing and if we could talk. I responded politely but briefly, telling her I was focusing on moving forward and hoped she found what she was looking for. She seemed confused by my lack of drama, maybe even disappointed that I wasn't fighting for her. The first year of running the business was brutal. We worked 16-hour days, survived on ramen and coffee, and reinvested every penny back into growth. But we were good at what we did. My background in finance complemented his marketing expertise perfectly, and we started landing clients who valued our personalized approach over the cookie-cutter strategies offered by larger firms. I threw myself into work with the intensity of someone who had nothing else to lose. Every late night, every challenging client, every small victory became a step away from the life I'd planned and towards something I was building entirely for myself. My friend worried I was becoming obsessed, but I couldn't slow down. Motion was the only thing keeping me sane. 6 months in, we landed our first major client, a regional restaurant chain looking to expand their online presence. The contract was worth more than I'd made in my previous job, and suddenly our little company wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We hired our first employee, then our second, then moved out of my friend's garage into a real office space. I ran into her at a mutual friend's birthday party around the 8-month mark. She looked beautiful, relaxed, like someone who'd found exactly what she'd been searching for. She asked about work, and I told her things were going well. She mentioned she'd started dating someone casually, nothing serious, just exploring her options like she'd wanted. I congratulated her and meant it. The sharp edge of heartbreak had dulled into something more manageable, and seeing her didn't destroy me like I'd feared it might. If anything, I felt grateful. Her decision had forced me onto a path I never would have chosen, but that had led to discoveries about my own capabilities I never would have made. By year 2, we'd grown to 15 employees and were being featured in local business magazines as one of the area's fastest-growing companies. The financial success was gratifying, but what really drove me was the creative challenge of building something from nothing, of proving that my ideas and instincts could create value in the world. We'd started getting attention from potential investors, people who wanted to help us scale nationally. The conversations were preliminary, but the numbers being discussed were life-changing. My friend and I began talking about expansion possibilities, about taking our model to other markets. I bought a house, not the family home with the white picket fence I'd once imagined, but a sleek modern place that reflected who I was becoming rather than who I'd been. I furnished it exactly how I wanted, hung art I chose, created spaces that felt entirely mine. The success wasn't just financial. I discovered I had instincts for leadership, for seeing opportunities others missed, for building teams that accomplished more than the sum of their parts. The man who'd sat in that coffee shop 2 years earlier, devastated by someone else's decision about his future, felt like a stranger. Then came the texts. It started with a simple message asking how I was doing. I responded politely, briefly, the same way I had when we'd first broken up. But then they came more frequently, with a different tone. She'd heard about my success, seen articles about the company online. She was proud of me, she said. She'd always known I was capable of great things. I didn't respond to those messages. Something about the timing felt calculated in a way that made me uncomfortable. The texts escalated. She said she'd made a mistake, that she'd been scared and stupid and had thrown away the best thing in her life. The casual relationship she'd mentioned had ended badly. She'd been doing a lot of thinking about what really mattered, about how rare it was to find someone who truly understood you. She wanted to see me, to talk about possibilities, to see if we could find our way back to what we'd had. She'd grown up a lot in the past 2 years, learned things about herself that made her realize what she'd given up. I stared at these messages on my phone while sitting in my office, looking out at the team of people whose livelihoods depended on the company we'd built. The contrast wasn't lost on me. 2 years ago, I'd been planning a future around someone else's dreams and decisions. Now I was responsible for creating opportunities not just for myself, but for everyone who'd believed in our vision. My friend noticed my distraction and asked what was wrong. I showed him the messages, watched his face darken as he read them. He reminded me of the state I'd been in when she'd left, how destroyed I'd been, how hard I'd worked to rebuild myself. He asked if I was seriously considering responding. The honest answer was that I didn't know. Part of me was curious about what she wanted to say, what explanation she might offer for the timing of her sudden revelation. But a larger part of me recognized that the man she'd left wouldn't have interested her now, and the man I'd become had no need for her validation. I thought about the nights I'd spent questioning my worth, wondering what I'd done wrong, imagining scenarios where I could have been different enough to make her want to stay. I remembered the humiliation of explaining to friends and family that the wedding was off, the awkwardness of canceling vendors and returning gifts. But I also thought about the satisfaction of building something meaningful, the pride of employing people who did excellent work, the excitement of possibilities I never would have pursued if I'd stayed in my comfortable, predictable life as someone's soon-to-be husband. Her messages became more frequent, more desperate. She'd drive by my office building, she said, just to see the sign with our company name. She'd looked up articles about our success, read interviews I'd given about entrepreneurship and taking risks. She said she could see how much I'd grown, how much more confident and accomplished I'd become. The words that stuck with me were about growth and confidence. She was right that I'd changed, but not in ways that had anything to do with her or her approval. The growth had come from facing uncertainty without a safety net, from making decisions based on my own judgment rather than seeking consensus from someone who was supposed to be my partner. I realized that what bothered me most about her messages wasn't their desperation, but their fundamental misunderstanding of what had happened. She seemed to think my success was something that had happened to me, rather than something I'd created through specific choices and relentless work. She wanted to be associated with the outcome without having shared in the risk or effort that had produced it. Update 1. The investor meetings were going better than we'd hoped. 3 different firms had submitted preliminary offers to buy a controlling stake in the company, with valuations that would make both my friend and me financially secure for life. We'd gone from desperate entrepreneurs to people with real options, and the transformation still felt surreal. Her texts had become impossible to ignore. She'd started calling, leaving voicemails that began professionally but devolved into emotional pleas. She said she'd been following my success in the local business press, that she'd always believed in my potential even if she hadn't been ready to commit to marriage at the time. The revisionist history irritated me more than I'd expected. I remembered our conversations about my career, how she'd encouraged me to play it safe, to prioritize stability over ambition. She'd actively discouraged me from taking risks, from pursuing opportunities that might disrupt our comfortable routine. Now she was claiming credit for believing in potential she'd actually tried to suppress. I finally agreed to meet her for coffee, partly out of curiosity and partly to end the constant messages. We met at a different place this time, neutral territory that wouldn't carry the weight of our shared history. She looked nervous in a way I'd never seen before, carefully dressed like she was trying to make an impression. She congratulated me on my success, said she'd always known I was capable of great things, and asked detailed questions about the business that felt rehearsed rather than genuinely curious. Then came the real conversation. She admitted she'd made a mistake leaving, that she'd been scared of commitment, but had learned hard lessons about what really mattered in life. The casual dating hadn't fulfilled her the way she'd expected, and she'd realized that what we'd had was rare and valuable. She wanted to know if I'd consider trying again, starting slowly, seeing if we could rebuild what we'd shared. She was different now, more mature, more appreciative of stability and partnership. She could see how much I'd grown and was excited about the possibility of growing together. I listened without interrupting, watching her make her case like someone presenting a business proposal. There was something calculated about her approach that felt familiar but wrong, like she'd studied me from a distance and was trying to say what she thought I wanted to hear. When she finished, I told her I appreciated her honesty, but that I wasn't interested in revisiting our relationship. She seemed shocked, like she'd never considered the possibility that I might say no. She asked if there was someone else, if I was still angry about how things had ended, if there was something she could do to prove her sincerity. I explained that this wasn't about anger or punishment, but about recognition that we'd both become different people who wanted different things. The life I was building now wouldn't have been possible if we'd stayed together, and I couldn't pretend that wasn't significant. She pressed harder, saying that successful people needed partners who understood the challenges of ambition, who could provide emotional support during difficult times. She could be that person now in ways she couldn't before. She'd learned from her mistakes and was ready to be the kind of partner I deserved. The conversation felt increasingly uncomfortable as I realized she wasn't really talking about me as a person, but about the lifestyle and status that came with my success. She mentioned the house she'd seen in magazine photos, asked about the travel opportunities that came with client meetings, wondered about the social circles I was moving in now. I ended the meeting politely but firmly, telling her I hoped she found what she was looking for, but that it wouldn't be with me. She seemed genuinely surprised, like she'd never considered that her timing might be suspect or that I might have moved on completely. Update 2. The investor negotiations intensified over the following month. We'd narrowed our options to 2 firms with different visions for the company's future. One wanted aggressive national expansion with significant changes to our operational model. The other offered a partnership structure that would maintain our autonomy while providing resources for organic growth. My friend and I spent long nights discussing not just the financial implications, but what kind of legacy we wanted to build. The money was important, but so was preserving the culture and values that had made our success possible in the first place. During this crucial period, she escalated her efforts to reconnect. She started showing up at professional events where she knew I'd be present, always dressed impressively and armed with business cards from her new job at a marketing firm. She'd position herself in my line of sight, network with people who knew me, and create opportunities for casual interactions. The behavior was sophisticated enough to avoid being obviously stalking, but persistent enough to feel manipulative. She'd researched my interests and opinions, could speak intelligently about industry trends, and positioned herself as someone who could be valuable to my professional network. Other people began to notice and comment. My friend warned me that her behavior was creating awkward situations at business events. Clients and contacts were asking about our relationship status, whether there was drama I needed to handle before finalizing major deals. I decided to address the situation directly. I called her and asked her to stop attending events where she knew I'd be present, explaining that her behavior was becoming disruptive to my professional life. She seemed genuinely surprised by my directness, claiming she was just trying to rebuild her own career and hadn't realized her presence was problematic. She suggested we could both benefit from being seen together professionally, that our combined networks could create opportunities for both of us. The conversation revealed something that had been bothering me since our coffee meeting. She seemed to view relationships primarily as strategic partnerships rather than emotional connections. I told her clearly that I had no interest in any kind of relationship, professional or personal, and asked her to respect my boundaries. She agreed, but there was something in her tone that suggested she viewed this as a temporary setback rather than a final answer. 2 days later, I received a text from my mother asking about my friend who'd reached out on social media. Apparently, she had contacted my family members, telling them she was worried about me and thought I might be working too hard and isolating myself from people who cared about me. The manipulation was sophisticated and infuriating. She'd positioned herself as the concerned ex-girlfriend who only wanted what was best for me, while painting me as someone so consumed with success that I was losing perspective on what really mattered. I had to spend an uncomfortable evening explaining to my parents that she was my ex-fiancée who was having trouble accepting that our relationship was over, and that her concerns about my well-being were not based on current knowledge of my life. They were confused and worried, exactly the reaction she'd probably hoped for. Update 3. We accepted the partnership offer that allowed us to maintain operational control while accessing capital for expansion. The deal made both my friend and me millionaires on paper, with the potential for significantly more if we hit our growth targets over the next 3 years. The signing was scheduled for a Friday afternoon, with a celebration dinner planned for our entire team afterward. It felt like a culmination of everything we'd built, validation that the risks we'd taken and the sacrifices we'd made had been worthwhile. That morning, she sent a text congratulating me on the deal and asking if I'd be willing to meet for one final conversation. She said she'd been doing a lot of thinking and wanted to apologize properly for her behavior over the past few months. She realized she'd been pushy and inappropriate and wanted to clear the air so we could both move forward without awkwardness. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her that evening after the celebration dinner. Something about the tone of her message seemed different, more genuine, and I thought maybe she'd finally accepted reality and wanted to end things on a positive note. The team dinner was incredible. Seeing people who'd believed in our vision celebrating success they'd helped create felt better than any personal achievement. These were people who'd taken risks by joining a startup, who'd worked long hours for equity stakes rather than guaranteed salaries, who'd contributed ideas and energy to something we'd all built together. I met her afterward at a quiet bar near my office, feeling relaxed and generous from the evening's celebration. She looked different, less polished, more vulnerable, like she'd dropped the performance that had characterized our recent interactions. She apologized sincerely for her behavior over the past few months, acknowledging that she'd been manipulative and desperate in ways that were unfair to both of us. She said she'd been struggling with regret about her decision to leave, but had been handling it poorly by trying to force a reconciliation that I clearly didn't want. The apology felt genuine, and for the first time in months, I relaxed around her. We talked about our respective lives, careers, and futures without the underlying tension that had defined our recent interactions. She seemed to have accepted that we weren't getting back together and was focusing on moving forward independently. But then, as we were preparing to leave, she made one final attempt. She said she understood that I wasn't interested in resuming our romantic relationship, but wondered if I'd consider giving her a chance to prove herself professionally. Her marketing firm was looking to expand their client base, and she thought there might be opportunities for collaboration now that my company was growing. The request was reasonable on its surface, but something about the timing felt calculated. After months of personal appeals, she was pivoting to professional ones, still looking for ways to insert herself into my life and success. I told her that all business decisions went through proper channels and that she should contact our office through normal procedures if her firm wanted to submit a proposal. She seemed disappointed but accepted my response gracefully. As I drove home that night, I realized that her behavior throughout this entire process had revealed something important about who she was as a person. Every interaction had been strategic, designed to advance her interests rather than genuinely reconnect with me as a human being. She'd studied my success from the outside and wanted access to it, but had never shown real interest in me as an individual separate from my achievements. The contrast with my current life was stark. I was surrounded by people who'd believed in me when I had nothing to offer but ideas and energy, who'd taken risks alongside me rather than waiting to see if I'd succeed before deciding I was worth their time. I blocked her number that night and asked my assistant to screen any business inquiries from her firm. It was time to close this chapter completely and focus on the future I was building with people who'd earned their place in it. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that she'd left the area for a job opportunity in another city. The news brought a sense of relief I hadn't realized I'd been needing. Sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. It's simply building a life so fulfilling that the person who rejected you becomes irrelevant to your happiness. The company continued to grow. We opened offices in 3 new cities, and I discovered that success was more satisfying when shared with people who'd been part of the journey from the beginning. Her decision to leave had felt like the end of my world at the time, but it had actually been the beginning of a much better one. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe and hype button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe and press the hype button. Thanks in advance.